Sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in plain sight, disguised as ordinary workers going about their daily routines. They mop floors in hospitals, clean offices after hours, and endure the dismissive glances of those who see only their uniforms and never their hearts. But what happens when the world discovers that the quiet woman pushing a mop bucket has been living a double life that would make Hollywood screenwriters weep with envy? What happens when a simple act of kindness reveals a secret so profound that it brings Navy SEALs to their knees and reduces hardened military commanders to tears? This is the story of Maria Santos, a woman whose humble work disguise concealed a heroism so deep and a sacrifice so meaningful that when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just change her life, it changed everyone who thought they knew what real courage looked like. Maria Santos pushed her yellow mop bucket down the long hallway of St. Mary's Hospital, the wheels squeaking with each rotation. It was 2:30 in the morning, and the corridor stretched before her like a river of polished linoleum under fluorescent lights. She had walked this same path every night for the past 8 years, invisible to most of the world. The overnight shift suited her perfectly. Fewer people meant fewer stares, fewer questions, and fewer opportunities for her carefully constructed life to unravel. She had built her existence around being overlooked, and she had become remarkably good at it. Dr. Harrison swept past her without acknowledgement, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor she had just finished cleaning. Behind him trailed 2 residents, their voices carrying the exhausted irritation of people who had been awake too long. "Did you see the way she was mopping earlier?" one of them whispered, just loud enough for Maria to hear. "Like she's never seen a floor before. These people, I swear." His colleague chuckled. "At least she shows up. Half the cleaning crew calls in sick whenever there's a full moon or a football game." Maria's grip tightened on the mop handle, but she kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse. Much worse. The comments about her broken English, her cheap shoes, her unfashionable uniform, they rolled off her back like water now. She had learned long ago that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that Maria Santos had once commanded the respect of some of the most dangerous men in Colombia. She had negotiated with drug cartels, outwitted corrupt officials, and saved more lives than everyone in this hospital combined. But that was another life, another identity, another woman entirely. The transformation had been necessary for survival. When she fled Colombia 8 years ago, she had to become someone new, someone forgettable. The woman who had once been featured on the front page of newspapers across South America for her humanitarian work had to disappear completely. Maria Elena Vesquez, the fearless human rights advocate, had died the night she escaped Bogota with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of secrets she could never share. Now she was Maria Santos, night janitor, invisible immigrant, nobody special. It was the perfect disguise. She moved through the pediatric ward, her footsteps soft against the tile. This was her favorite section of the hospital, despite the heartbreak that lived behind every door. The children reminded her of why she had fought so hard in her previous life, why she had risked everything to protect the innocent. Room 314 drew her attention as it always did. 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez had been fighting leukemia for 6 months, and his family had been living at the hospital almost as long. His mother, Isabella, often worked late shifts at a nearby diner to pay for the treatments insurance wouldn't cover. She would arrive back at the hospital around 3 a.m., exhausted and worried, carrying takeout containers of food she couldn't afford but bought anyway because the hospital cafeteria was closed. Maria had been watching this routine for weeks. She had seen Isabella counting crumpled dollar bills in the hallway, had witnessed her quiet tears when she thought no one was looking, had noticed how the woman's clothes had grown looser as she skipped meals to pay for her son's medicine. Tonight, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Isabella looked up from her son's bedside, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I'm sorry to bother you," Maria said in accented English, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Tommy. "I know this is a difficult time for your family." Isabella nodded politely but warily. She had learned to be suspicious of strangers, especially ones who approached her during her most vulnerable moments. Maria reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out an envelope. "My church, we take collections sometimes. For families who are struggling. I see you here every night, and I think maybe this can help a little. Isabella's eyes widened as she looked at the envelope. I can't take money from you. You work so hard, and you probably have your own family to care for. Please, Maria said, pressing the envelope into Isabella's hands. Sometimes God uses unexpected people to provide help. Let him work through me tonight. Isabella opened the envelope and gasped. Inside were $20 bills, more money than she made in a week at the diner. Her hands trembled as she counted them. I don't understand, she whispered. This is too much. Where did this come from? Maria smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. Sometimes angels dress like janitors, she said simply. Use it for Tommy's treatment, for food, for whatever you need. And, please, don't tell anyone where it came from. I prefer to remain invisible. As Maria turned to leave, Isabella called after her. Wait. What's your name? How can I ever thank you? No thanks needed, Maria replied. Just help your son get better. But Isabella was persistent. Please, I need to know who you are. My family will want to know who showed us such kindness. Maria paused in the doorway. For just a moment, she considered telling the truth. Not the whole truth, that would be impossible, but enough to let this struggling mother know that her benefactor understood something about fighting impossible battles. My name is Maria, she said finally. And I know what it's like to watch the people you love suffer while feeling powerless to help them. That's all you need to know. Over the following weeks, Maria's act of kindness rippled through the hospital in ways she never expected. Isabella had told her story to other families, describing the mysterious janitor who had appeared like an angel in their darkest hour. Soon, other struggling families began approaching Maria during her rounds, sharing their stories, looking for hope in her quiet presence. Maria found herself in an impossible position. Her cover depended on remaining invisible, but her heart wouldn't let her ignore the suffering around her. She began using her entire paycheck each month to help families in need, living on the money she had hidden away from her previous life, money she had planned to save for emergencies. The hospital staff began to notice changes too. Families that had been surly and difficult suddenly became cooperative and grateful. Children who had been inconsolable found comfort in small gifts that appeared mysteriously: stuffed animals, coloring books, video games. The pediatric ward developed a reputation as the happiest floor in the hospital, despite being the one where the saddest cases were treated. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the head of pediatric oncology, was the first to put the pieces together. She had been working at St. Mary's for 15 years and had never seen anything like the transformation happening on her ward. Families were more positive, children were responding better to treatment, and the overall atmosphere had shifted from despair to hope. It was during a late-night consultation with a colleague that she first noticed Maria in action. Dr. Walsh had been discussing a particularly difficult case, a young boy whose family couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might save his life, when she saw Maria approach the family's room with an envelope. Curiosity compelled Dr. Walsh to follow at a distance. She watched as Maria spoke quietly with the boy's mother, handed over the envelope, and disappeared around a corner before the grateful woman could properly thank her. When Dr. Walsh checked on the family later, she learned that they had just received enough money to begin the experimental treatment. Dr. Walsh began paying closer attention to Maria's activities. What she discovered amazed her. The quiet janitor was single-handedly funding treatments for multiple families, providing food and housing assistance, and somehow managing to be exactly where she was needed most, exactly when hope seemed lost. But it was Maria's interaction with a particular patient that finally revealed the depth of her hidden identity. 12-year-old Carlos Mendez had been brought to the hospital after being caught in crossfire during a gang shooting. The boy spoke only Spanish, was terrified of authority figures, and had refused to cooperate with doctors or social workers. Dr. Walsh watched as Maria entered Carlos's room and began speaking to him in rapid, fluent Spanish. But this wasn't the broken English accented Spanish she used during her daily work. This was the Spanish of an educated woman, someone who understood complex concepts and could communicate with authority and compassion. More importantly, Dr. Walsh noticed how Carlos responded. The frightened, defiant child relaxed immediately. He looked at Maria as if she were someone he could trust completely, someone who understood not just his language but his world. Maria spent the entire night in that room, holding the boy's hand, translating for doctors, and somehow convincing him to let the medical team help him heal. When Dr. Walsh approached Maria the next evening, she did so with careful respect. "The way you helped Carlos was remarkable," Dr. Walsh said. "You have a gift for working with traumatized children. Have you ever considered working in social services or counseling?" Maria's expression became guarded. "I am just janitor. I clean floors." "I don't think that's entirely true," Dr. Walsh said gently. "I've been watching you work with families for weeks. You understand trauma, you speak multiple languages fluently, and you have resources that don't match your salary. Who are you really?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She had been discovered, but by someone who seemed trustworthy. Someone who cared about the same things she cared about. "I am someone who had to become invisible to survive," Maria said finally. "But I never stopped caring about people who suffer. That's all you need to know." Dr. Walsh nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But I want you to know that whatever your story is, whatever brought you here, you're making a difference. These families, these children, they call you their angel. They pray for you every night." That night, as Maria finished her rounds, she couldn't shake Dr. Walsh's words. For 8 years, she had lived in the shadows, convinced that her previous life was over forever. But maybe there was a way to help people without fully revealing herself. Maybe Maria Santos the janitor could be more than just a disguise. She made a decision that night that would set in motion events she could never have anticipated. She decided to trust Dr. Walsh with a small piece of her truth. Not enough to endanger herself, but enough to expand her ability to help. What Maria didn't know was that her acts of kindness had been noticed by more than just hospital staff. Isabella Rodriguez had shared her story with her brother-in-law, a local news reporter who was always looking for human interest stories. Dr. Walsh had mentioned the mysterious Good Samaritan to her husband, who worked in military intelligence. And Carlos Mendez had described his angel to a social worker who specialized in helping refugees and immigrants. The threads of Maria's carefully constructed invisible life were beginning to unravel, but in ways that would soon reveal the extraordinary woman she had always been. The phone call that would change everything was already being made, by someone who had been searching for Maria Elena Vasquez for 8 long years. 3 weeks after her conversation with Dr. Walsh, Maria noticed changes in the hospital that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Security guards seemed to linger in the hallways longer than usual. Administrative staff asked questions about her schedule that they had never bothered with before. Most unsettling of all, she caught glimpses of men in expensive suits having quiet conversations with hospital administrators, men who looked out of place in a medical facility. Maria's instincts, honed by years of living on the edge of danger in Colombia, screamed warnings. She had survived by recognizing when environments shifted from safe to dangerous, and St. Mary's Hospital was definitely shifting. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Maria arrived for her shift to find her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, waiting by her supply closet with an expression that mixed confusion and concern. "Maria, I need to ask you some questions," Mrs. Chen said, her usually crisp voice uncertain. "Some people from the government were here today asking about you. They wanted to know about your background, how long you've worked here, whether you've ever mentioned family in other countries." Maria's blood turned cold. What kind of government people? They said they were from immigration services, but they didn't act like any immigration officers I've ever met. They were too polite, too professional. And they asked very specific questions about your interactions with patients and families. Mrs. Chen studied Maria's face carefully. They seemed to know more about you than they were letting on. That night, Maria went through the motions of her cleaning routine while her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone in Colombia finally tracked her down? Was her false identity compromised? Had she made a mistake that exposed her location? She was mopping the floor near the nurse's station when she overheard a conversation that made her stop breathing. The DNA results came back, Dr. Walsh was saying to another doctor. The blood sample from Carlos Mendez's room matched the sample they'd been looking for. Apparently, someone very important has been searching for our mystery angel for years. DNA sample, the other doctor asked. I don't understand. Neither do I completely, Dr. Walsh replied. But, those men in suits weren't from immigration. They were from the Department of Defense. Someone in the military has been trying to find our Maria Santos, or whatever her real name is, for a very long time. Maria's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the mop handle to steady herself as the implications crashed over her. Somehow, her DNA had been collected and tested. The only way that could have happened was if someone had accessed medical records from her previous life, from before she became Maria Santos. She finished her shift mechanically, her mind racing through escape plans she had hoped never to use. By dawn, she had made her decision. It was time to disappear again, to become someone new, to start over in another city, another life. But, as she walked to her car in the hospital parking garage, she found her path blocked by 3 vehicles. 2 black SUVs and 1 military Humvee, positioned to prevent any exit. Men in dress uniforms emerged from the vehicles, their bearing and demeanor immediately identifiable as military, but not threatening. The man who approached her wore the insignia of a Navy commander. He was tall, weathered, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. But his expression was respectful, almost reverent. "Ma'am," he said, stopping 10 feet away and offering a crisp salute. "I'm Commander James Mitchell, United States Navy SEALs. I need to speak with you about your work in Colombia between 2010 and 2016. Maria's carefully constructed composure cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a janitor. You have me confused with someone else." Commander Mitchell's expression softened. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we know exactly who you are. We've been looking for Maria Elena Vasquez for 8 years. We know about your work with displaced families in Medellin. We know about the refugee camp you operated in secret. We know about the 847 children you evacuated from cartel territory. And we especially know about the American soldiers you saved." The words hit Maria like physical blows. No one was supposed to know about the American soldiers. That operation had been so classified, so dangerous, so impossible that she had convinced herself it might have been a dream. "You're mistaken," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Commander Mitchell reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. He held it up so Maria could see it clearly. The image showed a younger version of herself standing next to a group of injured American soldiers in jungle fatigues. She was wearing medical scrubs that were torn and blood-stained, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face exhausted but determined. This photograph was taken by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez 6 days after his squad was captured by FARC guerrillas in 2015, Commander Mitchell said quietly. "You spent 2 weeks negotiating their release, then another week providing medical care while they recovered enough to travel. According to their testimony, you saved all 5 lives at considerable risk to your own." Maria stared at the photograph, memories flooding back with painful clarity. She remembered the desperate phone calls, the dangerous meetings in jungle clearings, the nights spent treating infected wounds with limited supplies. She remembered the fear in those young soldiers' eyes, and her determination to get them home to their families. "Sergeant Rodriguez has been looking for you ever since," Commander Mitchell continued. "All 5 of those men have been looking for you. They've never stopped trying to find the woman who risked everything to save them." "They were supposed to forget," Maria said, her voice barely audible. "For their safety and mine, they were supposed to forget I existed." "Ma'am, no soldier forgets the person who saves their life. No soldier forgets someone who treats them like family when they're far from home and facing death." Commander Mitchell's voice carried deep emotion. "Those men have spent 8 years wondering if you survived, wondering if you were safe, wanting to thank you properly for what you did." Maria looked around the parking garage, noting the respectful distance maintained by the other military personnel. They weren't treating her like a suspect or a criminal. They were treating her like someone they honored. "How did you find me?" she asked. Your DNA was in the system from your humanitarian work, Commander Mitchell explained. When you helped that boy Carlos, you left traces on his medical equipment. The hospital ran standard tests, and your profile matched records we've had on file since Colombia. Dr. Walsh noticed your unusual skills and mentioned them to her husband, who works in military intelligence. When he heard the description, he initiated the search. Maria felt the weight of 8 years of hiding pressing down on her shoulders. I can't go back to that life, she said. It's too dangerous. There are people who still want me dead. We know about the threats, Commander Mitchell said. We know why you had to disappear. But things have changed, ma'am. The cartels you opposed have been dismantled. The corrupt officials you exposed have been arrested. Colombia is a different place now, and much of that change happened because of the work you did. He paused, studying her face carefully. More importantly, you don't have to go back to Colombia. We're not here to relocate you or change your life. We're here because 5 men who owe you their lives want to thank you, and because your country wants to recognize what you did. My country? You became a U.S. citizen 4 years ago under your new identity, Commander Mitchell said. But Maria Elena Vasquez's actions in Colombia made her a hero to the United States military long before that. You saved American soldiers, Maria. That makes you family. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of helicopters approaching. Maria looked up to see 2 military aircraft descending toward the hospital's landing pad, their rotors creating a thunderous noise that echoed through the parking garage. Those helicopters contain some people who've been waiting a very long time to see you, Commander Mitchell said, raising his voice over the noise. The 5 soldiers you saved, their families, and some military leadership who want to properly thank you for your service. Maria watched the helicopters land, her mind reeling. I'm scared, she admitted. I've been invisible for so long. I don't know how to be Maria Elena Vasquez anymore. You never stopped being her, Commander Mitchell said gently. You've been helping families here the same way you helped families in Colombia. You've been saving lives here the same way you saved lives there. The only difference is the location. As the helicopter rotors wound down, Maria could see figures emerging from the aircraft. Even at a distance, she recognized the bearing and movement of soldiers. Her heart began to race as she realized that some of these men might be the boys she had nursed back to health in a Colombian jungle 8 years ago. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you, Commander Mitchell said. You can remain Maria Santos, night janitor, invisible angel of St. Mary's Hospital. Or you can allow Maria Elena Vasquez to receive the recognition she deserves. Either way, those men are going to thank you. Either way, your country is going to honor you. The only question is whether you'll let the world know that heroes sometimes hide in plain sight, mopping floors and cleaning rooms while they change lives one person at a time. Maria thought about Isabella Rodriguez, who now had enough money to pay for her son's treatment. She thought about Carlos Mendez, who was healing not just physically but emotionally because someone had shown him kindness. She thought about all the families she had helped over the past 8 years, and all the families she could help in the future if she had proper resources and support. If I agree to this, she said slowly, what happens to my work here at the hospital? These families still need help. Commander Mitchell smiled. Ma'am, I think you'll find that Maria Elena Vasquez has resources available to help families that Maria Santos never dreamed of. The United States military takes care of its heroes, and heroes take care of the people who need them most. As they walked toward the hospital's landing pad, Maria felt as though she were shedding one skin for another. The invisible woman was about to become visible again, but this time on her own terms, with protection and support instead of danger and isolation. She had no idea that the reunion waiting for her would be more emotional than anything she had experienced since leaving Colombia. She had no idea that her story would inspire national recognition for unsung heroes everywhere. And she had no idea that the hospital where she had worked as an invisible angel was about to become the headquarters for the most successful veteran support organization in the country. The woman who had spent 8 years believing her heroic life was over was about to discover that her most important work was just beginning. The helicopter pad at St. Mary's Hospital had never seen anything like the scene unfolding on that Wednesday morning. What had started as a simple search for a missing humanitarian had evolved into one of the most emotional military reunions in recent history. Hospital staff gathered at windows and, on the roof, watching in amazement as their quiet night janitor was greeted by Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and military officials whose ribbons and medals told stories of service in the world's most dangerous places. Maria stood frozen as 5 men in dress uniforms approached her across the landing pad. These were no longer the frightened, wounded boys she had cared for in a Colombian jungle. They were mature soldiers, hardened by years of additional service, but their eyes held the same gratitude and respect she remembered from those desperate days in 2015. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now a master sergeant, reached her first. He stopped 3 feet away and rendered the most precise salute Maria had ever seen. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Ma'am, Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, United States Army Rangers. I don't know if you remember me, but you saved my life in Colombia. You saved all our lives. We've been looking for you ever since." The recognition hit Maria like a wave. Rodriguez had been the youngest of the captured soldiers, barely 19, with a bullet wound in his shoulder and infection setting in. She had spent 3 days sitting by his side, forcing him to drink water and take antibiotics she had obtained through dangerous negotiations with local contacts. "Carlos," she whispered. "You were just a baby then. Look at you now." "Ma'am, I'm 32 years old, married with 2 children, and I owe every day of my life since 2015 to you." Rodriguez's voice was steady despite the tears in his eyes. "We all do." The other 4 soldiers stepped forward, each offering their own salute, each sharing brief words of gratitude that carried the weight of 8 years of wondering and searching. Sergeant First Class Thompson, who had lost part of his leg to shrapnel but had recovered to serve 2 more tours. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been promoted to officer rank and now trained other soldiers in survival techniques. Sergeant Williams, who had left the military to become a paramedic but credited Maria with inspiring his desire to save lives. And Specialist Davis, who had been so traumatized by his capture that Maria had spent hours talking him through panic attacks, and who now worked as a counselor for veterans with PTSD. As each man shared his story, Maria began to understand the ripple effect of her actions. These weren't just 5 soldiers she had helped. These were 5 men who had gone on to save other lives, to serve their country with distinction, to build families and careers and contribute to their communities in ways that might never have happened if she hadn't risked everything to secure their freedom. But the most emotional moment came when a woman stepped forward from the group near the helicopters. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple dress and carrying a framed photograph. "Mrs. Vasquez," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Margaret Rodriguez, Carlos's mother. I've been praying for you every single day for 8 years. My son told me about the woman who sang to him when he was delirious with fever, who stayed awake for 3 days straight to make sure he didn't die, who risked her life to get medicine when the infection was spreading." Margaret held up the photograph, and Maria saw it was a picture of Rodriguez's wedding day. "He walked me down the aisle because you made sure he came home alive," Margaret continued. "My grandchildren exist because you saved their father's life." There aren't words for what that means to a mother. The formal ceremony that followed was unlike anything Maria could have imagined. Commander Mitchell explained that the Department of Defense had been working for months to prepare a recognition that honored her service while respecting her need for security. They had created a new category of civilian recognition specifically for humanitarian workers who save military lives in combat zones. The Medal of Valor for Humanitarian Service had been personally approved by the Secretary of Defense, and Maria Elena Vasquez was its first recipient. As the medal was pinned to her hospital uniform, she had refused to change out of her work clothes. Maria felt the weight of 2 identities finally merging into one complete person. But the real surprise came when Dr. Walsh stepped forward with an announcement that left everyone stunned. 8 months ago, after I first noticed Maria's extraordinary work with our families, I contacted some friends in the nonprofit sector, Dr. Walsh said. We began developing a plan for a new kind of support organization, one that would combine military resources with civilian humanitarian expertise to help veterans and their families, as well as other families in crisis. She gestured toward a man in civilian clothes who had been standing quietly with the military group.
This is Robert Chen, director of the Veterans Alliance Foundation.
Thanks to funding from several military support organizations and private donors who have heard Maria's story, we're prepared to announce the opening of the Maria Elena Vasquez Center for Family Support, right here at St. Mary's Hospital. Maria stared in disbelief as Dr. Walsh continued explaining. The center will provide financial assistance, counseling services, medical support, and family advocacy for veterans, immigrants, and any families facing crisis situations.
And, Maria, if you're willing, we'd like you to be the director.
But, I'm just a janitor, Maria protested weakly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. No ma'am, Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward again. You're a woman who saved 5 American soldiers, evacuated 847 children from danger, operated refugee camps in war zones, negotiated with terrorists, and, then, spent 8 years helping families in crisis while working a night job that barely paid your bills. You're exactly the person who should be running a center dedicated to helping people who have nowhere else to turn. The impact of the announcement rippled through the hospital like an earthquake. Families that Maria had helped over the years emerged from rooms and hallways, many of them in tears as they learned the true identity of their mysterious benefactor. Isabella Rodriguez arrived with her son Tommy, who was now in remission and healthy enough to attend school. Carlos Mendez, the frightened boy who had refused to speak to anyone but Maria, had grown into a confident teenager who was translating for other Spanish-speaking families at the hospital. But, perhaps the most touching moment came when Mrs. Chen, Maria's supervisor, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face.
I always knew there was something special about you, Mrs. Chen said. The way you worked, the way you cared about everyone, the way you never complained no matter how difficult things got. But, I never imagined anything like this. She handed Maria a letter.
This came for you yesterday, addressed to Maria Santos, but I think it's really for Maria Elena Vasquez.
Maria opened the letter with shaking hands.
It was from the governor of the state, formally inviting her to accept the Citizen of the Year award at a ceremony the following month. The letter explained that her story had already begun to spread, inspiring other communities to recognize the unsung heroes working quietly among them. As the formal ceremonies wound down and the helicopters prepared to depart, Maria found herself standing alone with Commander Mitchell on the hospital's landing pad. The man who had tracked her down was now preparing to leave her in the hands of people who would help her build a new life that honored both her past and her future. I have one more thing to tell you, Commander Mitchell said quietly. Those 5 soldiers you saved have been contributing to a fund for 8 years, setting aside money every month in hopes of finding you someday. They want you to use that money to help other families the way you helped them. He handed her a bank statement that made her gasp. The account contained over $400,000. But, that's not all, he continued. When word of your story reaches the public, and it will, you're going to find that a lot of people want to support the work you're doing. Americans love stories about heroes who hide in plain sight. You're going to have more resources to help people than you ever dreamed possible. As the helicopters lifted off and disappeared into the sky, Maria stood in the parking garage where her old life had ended just hours earlier. Around her, the hospital buzzed with excited conversation about their celebrity janitor, the woman who had been saving lives in secret for years. Dr. Walsh approached with a schedule of meetings for the following week. We have architects coming to design the new family center, counselors who want to volunteer their services, and a dozen military families who have already requested appointments.
Are you ready for this?
Maria looked through the hospital windows at the families she had been helping in secret for so long. She thought about all the other families out there who needed someone to believe in them, to fight for them, to remind them that they weren't alone in their struggles. I'm ready, she said, and, for the first time in 8 years, she meant it completely. 6 months later, the Maria Elena Vasquez Center for Family Support had helped over 300 families, provided scholarships to 50 children of veterans, and inspired similar programs in 12 other cities. Maria herself had been featured on national television, had spoken at 3 military academies, and had been invited to the White House to meet with the president about expanding veteran support services. But, every night at 2:30 a.m., she still walked the halls of St. Mary's Hospital. Not as a janitor now, but as a director checking on families, ensuring that no one fell through the cracks, making sure that hope remained visible even in the darkest moments. The woman who had once believed her heroic life was over had discovered that heroes never really retire. They just find new ways to serve, new people to protect, and new reasons to prove that extraordinary courage often comes disguised as ordinary work. Maria Elena Vesquez had spent 8 years hiding her light under a bushel, but now that light was illuminating paths to hope for thousands of people who had previously walked in darkness. The janitor had become a beacon, and the invisible woman had become a symbol of the truth that heroes are everywhere around us, usually dressed in uniforms we don't associate with greatness, usually doing work we don't recognize as noble, usually changing the world one small act of kindness at a time. The laughter that had once followed Maria down hospital corridors as staff mocked the poor immigrant woman with the mop bucket had been replaced by something much more powerful, the quiet gratitude of people whose lives had been transformed by a woman who proved that the most important battles are often fought by people the world never notices, until the day comes when the world finally opens its eyes and sees the angels that have been walking among them all along.